Bienvenidos a Se Habla Real Estate, el primer show en español con la misión de proveer a la comunidad hispana la mejor educación sobre dinero, bienes raíces y emprendimiento de una manera simple y práctica.
What's up everyone, Lennon Lee por aquí, ready para otro episodio de Se Habla Real Estate Show. Por aquí como siempre acompañado de Arturo Borges, my co-host. ¿Qué dice Arturoski? ¿Cómo está todo, brother?
Yo estoy excelente, Lee. Hoy le haremos preguntas a un invitado con quien conversaremos en inglés. Se trata de David Pere. Él es un inversionista en bienes raíces, pero además David es un oficial activo de los Marine Corps y es host del podcast From Military to Millionaire. David se unió a los Marine Corps en el 2008 después de leer el famoso libro de Robert Kiyosaki, de Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Se dio cuenta que la precaria situación financiera de los oficiales del ejército y de otros miembros de la clase trabajadora es autoinducida y por lo tanto es mejorable. Es por eso que en el 2015 hizo sus primeras inversiones en real estate, comenzando por un dúplex y un edificio de 10 unidades que compró en Missouri, gracias a un préstamo de la FHA. Luego de esta increíble experiencia fue que nació su podcast, de nuevo, From Military to Millionaire, con el fin de enseñarle tanto a efectivos militares como a veteranos cómo construir riqueza a través de la inversión inmobiliaria, del emprendimiento y el manejo de las finanzas personales. Como resultado, David ha ayudado a muchos de sus oyentes y lectores a inflar su cuenta de ahorros, adquirir propiedades y aumentar sus posibilidades de alcanzar la libertad financiera. David, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I don't know if you got that, and I've said it in previous episodes that where we had service members come here and tell their stories. I've always had deep respect for the military, and I would love to dig deeper into your career in the Marine Corps, what you do there, and understand the kind of mindset that you developed serving the forces, and what you consider to be the most relevant skills you acquired being there. You're active, actually, and how has that impacted your real estate investing journey?
Yeah, I would love to tell you that I picked up on all of that, but my Spanish is un poco, not very good, and so. But it was cool to hear my bio in Spanish. That's a first, so pretty cool. Yeah. Well, I mean, I joined the Marine Corps in 2008, and I do logistics stuff, so I've been traveling around the world, been kind of stationed all over the place, and I think there's a couple different things that service members pick up that are really helpful with like investing in real estate. There's benefits, like we have the VA loan, which is really, really powerful if used properly. But I think like one of the things that service members have, aside from like just the discipline to kind of get up and do the same thing that needs to be done every day, is that the military kind of breeds decisiveness. They teach you that any decision is better than no decision, or, even a bad decision is better than no decision. And so you kind of get used to making very quick decisions under pressure, which is valuable when it comes to real estate investing, because like we'll take this morning, for example, I'd never made an offer on a property on like an auction website for a real estate REO property. And I was looking around online today and I found an auction that was ending in, the auction would have ended like 20 minutes from when I found this property, and the price was good. And, a year or two ago, I would have hesitated maybe, but I think part of the military mindset is just being super decisive and saying, you know what, that's a great price. Let's make an offer. We'll figure it all out later. Now, I got outbid, but I know a lot of people who would have hesitated and not even tried. And I think that the ability to be decisive and take action is something the military, especially the Marine Corps, instills in us. And I think that helps you out in the real estate world.
I love it. Yeah, I think that's super powerful. Just taking action, right? Without, which ultimately that's what entrepreneurship ends up being, no matter what type of industry you're on. Like you need to make decisions among or while having a lot of uncertainty as well. Like you don't have all the everything figured out, but you still need to move forward. You still need to, make some decisions that obviously they bring some risks along, with them, but that's what it is. If not, then you're just stuck. You're not moving, right?
Absolutely.
So you started like a lot of us. That was my beginnings, was also by reading Rich Dad Poor Dad. That's basically I would say the Bible for a lot of real estate investors, right?
Yeah.
But it's funny because he talks about real estate because that's one of the asset classes that he likes, that he understands, that he believes in. But he doesn't talk about real estate alone. He talks about businesses and some other stuff. But I guess my question is, why did you decide to go with real estate? What made sense for you?
That's a good question. I had looked at real estate previously, and I just kind of talked myself out of it because I didn't know what I was doing. So when I went on recruiting duty in 2013, I looked at buying a house, and I met with a realtor, but I just didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't have anyone to guide me. And I kind of talked myself out of it because it would just be easier to get an apartment. And then I got the apartment. And about a year and a half, 2 years later, is when I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. And he mentions real estate in there, and it just made sense. So I read a couple other real estate books, and the lease on my apartment was coming due. And it was basically, either I pay $550 a month to continue living in this little tiny apartment, or I buy a duplex. And the way the numbers worked out, my mortgage wasn't going to be much more expensive. And I found this place where the mortgage was like $615, and the one side was rented for $475. And I realized, okay, well, my mortgage with this other tenant is going to be less than the apartment. I might as well just go for it and see what happens. And so, that's kind of one of the reasons I like the house hack, is because it's so easy to talk yourself into. It's not scary because you're buying a house, which is kind of a normal process in life. So it's nowhere near as scary as if you were to go and buy an apartment complex for your first deal. And so, I took action on that. Partially because of the books, partially because I'd already been thinking about it, and partially just kind of the stars aligning for timing. And I guess I never looked back.
And if you go back a little bit, as part of your story, you recognize that you wasted the majority of the first two enlistments financially. You spent money on tattoos, cars, guns, dates, and anything else that was quote unquote cool. So why do you think that was the case with you? How do you think that that can be fixable? And what kind of advice would you give someone that is currently in that same position you were a few years ago?
Well, why it was the case? I'm a guy, and I didn't grow up poor by any means, but I didn't grow up well off, right? Your typical. My parents were religious, missionaries, lived on support, not wealthy, by any means, in a financial sense, very good parents. And so I think part of that was like the first time I had money to call my own, I wanted to go and buy the name brand stuff because I'd always been getting Kroger brand, my entire life. So it's like, well, now I can buy the fancy toothpaste and the fancy this and the, so I think that was part of it. I think the other part is, it's pretty easy in the military. When you join the military, you end up with like all your expenses covered immediately. It's like you have free housing, you have free room and board, you have free food, or not free, obviously, it all comes out of your paycheck, but like you don't see it. So you may not get a huge paycheck, but what you receive in that paycheck, you could literally blow to the penny, and you'd still have room and board, food, transportation, wherever you need to go. And so it's very easy to say, well, I can afford this. So I can afford that. Yeah, I can buy this. And I think if you couple all that with, at the time that I joined the Marine Corps in 2008, we were still kind of doing consistent movements to and from Afghanistan, Iraq. And so there's this like mentality of kind of like, well, screw it. I might die tomorrow. Like, not really, but kind of like this, why do I need to worry about retirement when I might go and deploy and I might not come back? So why start saving money for retirement when I could buy this awesome gun, or I could buy this sweet tattoo, or this really cool car, or chase this girl? And it becomes very easy to justify really bad decisions.
But it makes a lot of sense, because a lot of people, there's also some truth or some good to that advice that people give out, which is typically, well, kind of live your life like this is your last day on earth, which I understand where people come from with the advice, but it's just not realistic, right? It doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
But when you're in the military, it kind of does, at least at least a little bit more than for the average Joe, right? Like, because you're actually, getting deployed, and it actually becomes a little bit more real for you guys. So obviously, I think it's just understandable to think like that. So just continue. How do you get out of that mindset, or what do you think makes sense for people out there to not think like that every time or every day?
Well, I mean, Rich Dad Poor Dad's a good start. It's not a, there's another book called Set for Life as well by Scott Trench that I really like. I would probably recommend that one over Rich Dad Poor Dad if you're talking about just financial, getting your crap together. But Rich Dad Poor Dad's good because it takes a really boring subject and turns it into something that's at least interesting enough to read. It's not, a super actionable book. It's just more of a kind of shifts the way you think about money in general. But, if I was giving advice to someone who was like joining the military or someone who was younger, I would just say, like, it's a lot easier if you start right away than it is later. What I mean by that is, let's say you make $1,000 a month and you take that $1,000 a month and you blow it on whatever. And then you decide you want to save money. And so you're like, well, I'm going to save half my paycheck. Now you only get effectively $500 a month. Like, going from $1,000 to $500 a month is a loss. And that's hard to deal with, especially if you were spending every penny of that $1,000. But if you join the military and you were like, well, I'm going to get $1,000 a month, let me put half of that away immediately. Then in your head, like, you've only ever made the 500. So then if you get promoted and you go up $100 a month, maybe you spend half of that and save the other half. Well, psychologically, it's easier. So I always tell people, like, hey, if you're going to join the military, immediately put at least 10 or 20% of your paycheck into your thrift savings plan or 401k. And then when you do that, you're used to you never saw that money. And so it's not a loss. It's simple. You get used to spending the lesser amount of money, but you're continually saving 10, 20% of your paycheck, even if you don't know what else you're doing with money. And I think if I had just known, A, to do that, which I did sometimes, but I wasn't consistent, and B, what funds to put that money in instead of just leaving it. I left it in the government-backed bond fund, which means that from 2008 to 2015, I earned 1 or 2% interest while the rest of the world saw a booming economy recovering from 2008, and I didn't get to benefit from it. But, if I had just been consistent about the amount of money I put in there and knew what fund to put it in, I mean, I'd have double or triple the amount in my IRA that I do right now, and I'd be so much better off financially, but I would have still blown money and I would have still made bad decisions, but I wouldn't have had access to as much of my paycheck to do it with. And I was one of those where I spent the whole paycheck. So if I'd only assumed I was spending $800 every month instead of $1,000, I just would have bought a little bit less crap, but I would have at least had something to show for it. So I usually just tell people, like, don't let expense creep happen, right? Start off right away and try to just kind of cut out a little bit of your expenses and just put it somewhere. And it's amazing how much easier your life will be, even if you live paycheck to paycheck, but you already put away, paid yourself $200 or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that, but it's still challenging, right? Like, there's a lot of, a lot of us out there when we're younger, it's you can tell us whatever you want, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's hard to pay attention. So it also comes with experience and a little bit and dealing with other stuff in life that it's gonna allow you to pull yourself together. Okay, now and make mistakes, right? Like, you also need to allow yourself to make mistakes. I'm a firm believer that while yes, you should start as young as you can. We're here for like, generally speaking, like, yes, you can go out tonight and get hit by a bus or whatever. It's going to happen to a lot of people. That's fine. But generally speaking, we're here until we're at least 80, right?
Yeah.
And the first 15 to 20 years of our lives, it's like, we're not doing anything with it. Like we're just, we're just hanging around. So really, when you're 30, you've only really had 10 years to actually do something, or maybe less than that for a lot of us. So really, you're going to have like 2 or 3 more lives, like to start investing, to build a business, to fail a lot, and get back together and continue. So I always say patience. It's an asset that a lot of people don't really pay attention to. So I just want to put out there.
And I think that with what you said, Dave, it really comes down to discipline in a nutshell. That's a key word here. So, as a Marine service member, what would be some tangible tips that you could give for someone who's lacking that discipline, that consistency, that focus? Maybe it's a routine that you have, something you can share with us that someone can implement and start getting their life together.
Yeah, there's a few really good tricks. The first would be find somebody who has similar goals and holds each other accountable, right? Like even if it's just finding someone that you talk to once a week, once a day, once a month, whatever, and just say, hey, you said you were going to write 3 offers this week and you didn't. What gives? Having somebody that you, even if you don't need the actual accountability at the end of the day, having someone that you're going to have to report to will kind of create that drive to actually get your crap done. It's like when you have homework and everyone puts it off till the night prior because they don't actually want to do the homework, but then all of a sudden they're like, well, I can't flunk this, or I don't want to tell my teacher I didn't do it. So, all right, I'll get it done. Like, well, if you got a friend to report to, then you'll do that. Another thing is like every night, every morning, every night, write down your goals or your schedule. So like every morning I wake up and I journal my 3 big 90-day goals, what they are, when I plan on having them done, what my most important next step, or what my weekly goal is, what my most important next step is to accomplish that weekly goal. And then, I'll draw out my schedule for the day. So like, hey, at this time, I'm going to work on this. And at this time, I'm going to work on this. And then at the end of the night, I go back through and I write down what I did, what I didn't do, if I accomplished my most important next steps, most important goal for the day, and then kind of write down some notes for what I'm going to do tomorrow. So like last night, I knew exactly, last night I wrote in my journal that I was doing this at 2:00 my time. And then, at 5, I've got another podcast. And then at 6:30, I'm doing a presentation with someone. So like, those are the 3 big things that were on my like schedule today. So I wrote them all down before I went to bed. And then I woke up this morning and filled in the rest of the calendar and the goals. And that's, people think discipline and willpower go hand in hand. And it's like this superpower that some people have. I think the biggest thing that I could tell you, just think of it as a promise to yourself, right? You're making a promise to yourself that you're going to do something. And if you don't keep your word to yourself, who are you going to keep your word with? And so you just kind of have to look at it as like, it's not a willpower thing. It's just look, I'm going to do this at this time for this reason. And then, yeah, you're not always going to get it done, but at least like telling yourself like, yo, I'm going to do that. I need to do that. Whatever. And then just being hard on yourself. Like, it's not always fun. You don't always feel like doing it, but you'll feel better when it's done.
Yep. I couldn't agree more, man. Couldn't agree more. So, So let's get into the real estate conversation, right? You mentioned, well, basically your first deal was a house hack on a duplex,
yep.
Which I think it's awesome. I think, I didn't want to get into the house hacking deal or anything, but only one question I have before we move on. And it's, like for a lot of people, it's hard to find a deal or to find a duplex. For example, let's just say here in Miami, right? If you rent an apartment in a, let's say, Class A area or even a Class B area, you're probably not going to be able to find a duplex where the numbers make sense in terms of saying, well, I might as well, move into this duplex because I'm basically paying the same thing on an apartment or in a house that I rent. Like the difference, it's a lot wider, and not only on the pricing, but also the quality of the asset. And I know a lot of people, they don't want to live in a shitty area or in a shitty apartment. So how do you think about that? Because obviously there needs to be some sort of sacrifice, right? Like you need to understand, like if you're doing an investment, well, you might have to move from a luxury apartment to a not so luxury apartment just to be able to do it. But beyond that, like maybe looking at markets, looking at areas, how did you make that decision, and how do you think people should go about it?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And I mean, that worked very well for me in Missouri, but I live in San Diego right now. And I just worked with a guy. I know a few friends out here who've done it, but just introduced some people that bought a $730,000 triplex, and he's going to be bringing in like $600 after all expenses are paid. And so it's not like a grand slam. He's not making $1 million, but he's living for free in San Diego. It's a very expensive property, right? It's not easy to do. It took a lot of work and a lot of this and a lot of that, but it's doable as much as it's not ideal. I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like you can move markets. You can sacrifice and live somewhere that's not quite as ideal. But if you can't find a duplex, maybe what you do is you just find that roommate or that friend who's an accountability partner, bring them into the place, and you guys have a roommate situation. But at the end of the day, like you're not going to live on a penthouse in your own place and save a ton of money, right? So you're going to have to cut something, whether it's moving into a smaller place, having a roommate, Airbnb bedrooms, which is kind of a nice compromise because then you can block off the dates that you don't want anyone in the place. So like if you have family coming into town, it can still be your own place. I'm doing that right now. I'm renting a house in San Diego and I'm Airbnb-ing 2 bedrooms. And so it's not always ideal, but it's a good compromise. So I can shut it off when I've got family coming to visit or whatever. So I think
whenever you just don't feel like it right now.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, right?
Those rooms booked right now? How are you seeing that Airbnb market right now?
It's coming back. So for the last 4 or 5 months, I've basically turned my Airbnbs into like roommate situation. One of the guests was they were staying out here for long term, and the other places they had booked canceled on them, so they just stayed with me. And then the other one I basically just rented to a friend who got out of the military. But the Airbnb is coming back around. I've got it's a work in progress, and it's not really tourists so much as like a family member visiting a marine on base or a business trip. It's not really tourists at this point, but that'll come back eventually.
Cool. So you own an apartment complex, 10 units. That's part of your portfolio, right now?
Correct.
If I'm not mistaken. All right. So let's unpack that one, because I think that's well, I don't know where it is, but it's a deal size that it's achievable for definitely the average investor that might not be getting started, but maybe yes, they're getting started with that type of property. So, what's up with that deal? Like, where do you find it? Where it's located, and then we'll go from there.
Through the finding of that deal, the acquisition. How do you find the money? How do you fund it? And then how are you managing it?
Yeah, that deal was kind of a slam dunk in its own. Like, I was not ready to take on a 10-unit apartment. So it's affordable because it's Missouri, but I was sending letters out for duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, trying to find another multifamily property. And this guy just called me and said, "Hey, I've got this duplex for sale, but I don't want to sell it to you. However, I have a 10 unit if you'd be interested in that." I was like, "Oh, well, let's talk." And at the time I was living in Hawaii. I happened to be in town, so I drove by it while I was in town, but I saw the inside of like one unit through a window, but other than that, like I didn't really see the property. But we went back and forth, and he wanted like $250 for it. I got it under contract for like $225. It needed a bunch of work. But ultimately the seller ended up being willing to carry back some of the note. So he was willing to do some seller financing, which I don't know how much that's been discussed on your podcast, but if it's fairly new, it's basically just saying, "Hey, I'll pay you back over a certain amount of time if you will let me pay you back instead of bringing the full down payment." And so I only had to come out of pocket like 5.1% for the property. So I was out of pocket it was only like $10,000 out of pocket to buy this place. And the bank lent 70 or 85%, and the seller carried 10%. And then 18 months later, I refinanced, paid off the seller financing, and I had 30% equity. And I just refinanced, paid everything out, and cut my mortgage payment down by like $150, $200 a month and cash flows. So it was one of those properties where it was kind of risky because I didn't have a whole lot of skin in the game. I didn't have a whole lot of cash to my name yet, but it worked out and the numbers were good. And it was kind of one of those like, man, if I don't take this risk now, I'm going to regret it. So I jumped on it. And as of right now, I mean, so far, so good.
I mean, it's funny to me. Are you currently working? Have you worked with like a mentor coach that is, kind of assisting you in this or working with you in this? Because it kind of seems like you really know what you're doing in terms of all these acquisitions and financing and I'm just curious.
Yes and no. So no mentor, no coach, no paid, anything like that. Just a lot of networking, a lot of asking questions, and a lot of Google research through podcasts, books, and whatever. So, when this opportunity came up, I had some friends to ask questions of. And I also just, like when the seller financing piece came up, I just asked a bunch of questions and I was doing a lot of research on Google and I just kind of fell into place. Really wasn't, I don't know, sometimes I wonder like, man, I must have gotten lucky. But then I also think like, it really wasn't that, I don't remember it being that hard or that stressful. Like it was a little nerve wracking to buy a 10 unit, but I think I just kind of like, I knew a lot of people who were buying big things. So I was like, well, if all these guys are doing this, it's like, why can't I?
Yeah. It's just obviously a lot of self-confidence and believing in yourself. I think a lot of it comes from knowing and understanding that you are giving it your best, that you are out there putting in the work, that you are out there educating yourself. And that's how you build confidence, right? Like if you don't do that, then you're going to be like, well, but I haven't really done this yet. I haven't really done that. I don't know this. I don't know about that. You're not confident. You're not going to take action, right? Like It's harder to do it anyway. But still, right? Like let's try to unpack it a little bit further. First of all, the market, you knew the area, like that's where you're from. Is that it?
I was a recruiter out there in Missouri. Yeah.
Okay.
I spent 3 years there.
So what about location? Like you drove by and was it like in the area where you lived or close by, or like you knew the area or what?
I don't know that I'd ever been in that like specific part of town, but I was familiar enough with the neighborhood. And I mean, it's just like a low C-class neighborhood, nothing special. Just probably a mile and a half from downtown. And there was an apartment on the same street that had been renovated. So I knew it was a decent area, but it wasn't somewhere that I was like intimately familiar with. I more or less, I guess I should probably just mention that I have a really solid property manager. So my like always go to is to just text her and say, hey, what do you think of this? And she'll tell me.
Right. And you already owned your duplex there.
Yeah.
Right? And you had some other properties before that, or was that the second one?
My wife had a single family home, but I wasn't part of that acquisition. I'd bought a little bit of farmland, but this was the 10 unit was my second like actual rental property.
Got it. What about rental? Like the rent comps, right? How deep did you go? Because you can go from just Googling and going to Zillow versus maybe having a broker that it's more into the investing side and they can, I don't know, show you a CoStar report for the small properties. I don't know if they have CoStar for the smaller properties, but maybe they do or something like that.
I definitely didn't go that deep. I basically pulled up Rentometer and some Craigslist ads in the area to just kind of double check what I thought they should rent for, and then asked my property manager, and she had similar ballpark. So I said, well, that must be right. Let's go for it. And I don't know that I was right per se, but the market's appreciated a little bit. So I am now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, well, hindsight's 2020, right? So obviously it's great to look back and obviously see that the rents have gone up.
Talk about this.
Go ahead. Arturo, were you going to ask something?
No. I'm just saying, like, talk about decisiveness. That's a.
Oh yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the major takeaways that we're taking here on this episode. It's just, dude, go for it, right? Like, yeah, prepare and get your shit together, but just go for it. What about on the financing side? Was what type of loan that you get? And you mentioned 85%. That's a lot.
Yeah, it
right?
was actually, it's kind of funny. It was actually a mistake on the bank's part. So when we had agreed at 225 for the purchase price, and there were some renovations that needed to be done. So I talked them down about 12,500, but rather than giving me a seller credit, they just took it off the price of the property. And I guess somewhere in translation, that memo didn't make it to the bank. So I funded, it was going to be 10% from me, 10% from the seller, and then 80% from the bank. And something happened, and the bank showed up with the original check as though the purchase price was still 225. And so I basically got a phone call while I was in Hawaii that was like, hey, we can either postpone closing for like 3 days, or we'll cut you a check back and you could just put less money down. Like, okay, yeah, I'll put less money down. Okay, thank you. And so there was kind of like this super last minute fluke thing where the bank came in with an extra like 10,000 and some change, and I got to keep, or like 12,000 and some change, and I got to keep the difference.
Cool. And what was the business plan? Like, do you have major capex that needed? Like, how much do you have to invest per unit, if at all? Like,
it's fairly turnkey on the low end. So I've just been doing renovations with turnovers, and so nothing crazy really. Like no super high end renovations, just some touch up here. I've probably replaced 4 or 5 of the furnaces now. That's the biggest ticket items. I did I repainted the exterior, redid the gutters and fascia, and like lighting and some paint on the little parking area, basic like cosmetic stuff to let the tenants know that I was there. And then I'm responsible for utilities on that property because it's older, so it's not sub-metered. And so I started doing some rubs, utility billing to let the tenants pay part of the utilities. And I also did like some water saving stuff, like some low flow filters in the shower heads and sinks, as well as on off switches for the LED lights. That's about the extent, though. There's definitely some more stuff I could do to lower utilities and to lower some of the expenses. And I'm slowly working through those, but it's kind of like every time someone moves out, I just fix it up a little bit and turn it over. Nothing super crazy. It probably like 15,000, maybe 20,000 into it all in over the first 6 months. And then after that, like routine stuff.
What would you say that translates into in terms of forced appreciation? Like maybe you've put, let's say 20,000. How much value do you think you've added to the actual property?
So it appraised for 262 about a year ago, but I think that was low just because it was kind of one of those where like, this is the number it needs to meet in order to pull out this much cash type of thing. It should probably appraise for about 325 or 330 right now. So probably equates to about a $70,000 increase in property value.
And how is that property performing right now in terms of occupancy, rent collections? Are the rents marked to market? How's that going?
We've gotten them pretty close to market, and we've had very little issues given all the craziness that's gone on this year. It's actually been my heavy hitter. It's probably the best deal I've ever bought. It's at this point I have no money left in the deal other than some renovation stuff that is not really money of mine left in the deal. I pulled out all my original cash, and it cash flows probably $1,000 a month. Well, probably 15, somewhere in there. It kind of depends. It does fluctuate a lot on repairs because it's an older building, but anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 a month, I usually get to keep.
Yeah, that's a good number. Definitely. That's definitely a good number, especially not having any money in the deal at this point, right? That's just infinite returns. That's what we're all looking for. Yeah, I think that's awesome, man. I think that's a pretty, small for what the type of deals that you're doing now and that we do, but definitely a large deal, especially in how it's performing and how I assume how it allowed you to say, well, you know what, I hit it out of the park with the 10 units. I can definitely do 50 units. I can definitely do 200 units, right? Like, why not?
Definitely.
And yeah. So, I mean, I think we can leave it at that for now, man. I think we can definitely have you. We always tell our guests that we're going to have them a second time. I would love to have all of them and you as well a second time to talk about that. You of the air you mentioned you recently did a 140 plus units acquisition with GP LP structure through syndication and the whole thing. That would definitely be a good episode to dig deeper into that one and understand. Yeah,
I think we can keep him accountable and the following year and see where you're at. Sounds good.
I'm down. Let's do it.
But I'd like to close up, David, with imagining that, God forbid, you have, 5 days left on Earth, and everything you've done, everything you've said, written, you got to take with you. No one will ever be able to know about you or what you did. But you're going to have the opportunity to write down in a sheet of paper 2-3 things you consider yourself to be true, to the things that you've learned, that have dream in your life, and you can leave behind to your kids, friends, family. What would those be?
That's a pretty cool question. I like that. I would probably say that David was transparent, probably to a fault. It's gotten him in trouble quite a bit, but at least people always knew where he stood. I would say probably, I don't want to use the word selfless because that sounds like I'm a dickhead over here beating my chest, but I definitely spent a lot of time in my life working on this whole side hustle thing and a lot of other stuff to get content out and help other people. And so I'd like to think maybe we just say helpful instead of selfless. That sounds better. And number 3, man, that guy liked some chocolate and some chocolate brownies heated up with ice cream.
That sounds good, David. Thank you.
I love it, man.
Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your story. Gracias a ustedes por acompañarnos y asegúrense de compartirlo, de darle like, comenten, síganos en todas nuestras redes sociales, @sehablarealestate y se habla RE en Twitter, nuestra página web sehablarealestate.co, que ya la nueva página sale probablemente cuando ya esto esté al aire. Y para cualquier información nos pueden escribir a info@sehablarealestate.co. Dave, if someone wants to get in touch with you, how can they do it?
From militarytomillionaire.com, or I'm on Instagram at @FromMilitaryToMillionaire.
Sounds great.
Sounds good. Bueno, miren, ahí lo tienen. Nos vemos en el próximo episodio.